Hello, glad you could join me. In this video, I would like to discuss the topic of agnosticism. This is a topic I'd not thought about for quite a long while, but it is an interesting subject, one that is related to epistemology. And that is a subject I struggle with, so I'm often captured by debates where the protagonists make pronouncements on the topic with some certainty, which is why I found a series of tweets by Steve McRae interesting. Steve is a well-known and respected YouTuber. He is part of the great debate community, which I will link to below. I will also include a link to his YouTube channel, which I highly recommend. Steve presents himself as the self-styled Pope of Agnosticism, and this phrase is included in his Twitter handle. I find it interesting that he has declared himself the pontiff for a single philosophical position, but his commitment to it can only be described as tenacious. His Twitter exchanges often entail long, detailed, and often technical mathematical and philosophical arguments in support of agnosticism. He has employed logic, mathematics, and reason in support of his position. I would class this as a wide-spectrum approach. His favourite reference is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, in particular the entry on atheism and agnosticism. But don't worry, this video is more of an essay rather than an argument. I will try to set out my personal position in plain English. There will be nothing original here, except perhaps how I put these concepts together in the light of my own understanding. Whether I am successful in this, whether I am right or wrong, only you can be the judge. So, to provide context and to give you a flavour of Steve's tweets on the topic, here is a response to Matt Delahunty's pronouncement that if you are convinced that gods exist, you're a theist. If not, you're an atheist. To which Steve's response is to declare Matt's statement as not only wrong, but bullshit. Now, I disagree with Matt's position on many things, but given the area of his expertise, I would have assumed that he had a fairly good grasp on basic concepts such as theism, atheism, and agnosticism. Before we move on though, I will make an observation in relation to how Matt expressed his definition. What I believe he meant to say is that if you believe that gods exist, then you are a theist. If not, you are an atheist, which seems a pedantic point, but the difference is, I believe, fundamental to the debate. The tweet that actually prompted me to make this video is this one, where Steve responds to a tweet by HitBlunt16. Steve says in his response, and I quote, "Newsflash. A belief claim is a claim that you believe there are some state of affairs in the world, fact, which makes a proposition true, correspondence theory. To say otherwise is just intellectually dishonest." Well, accusations of dishonesty, intellectual or not, should never be made casually. Such pronouncements are often unwarranted and hardly move the conversation forward in any meaningful way. Steve's use of the term fact locates his statement within a particular domain. Let me explain. If one claims to know X, there are several conditions that must be met. The more philosophical types might express these conditions as necessary and sufficient. There are three. The first is that one believes X. The second, that one is justified in that belief. And the last, but no means least, X must be true. The philosophers out there will already have recognized that what I have described is the Platonic definition of knowledge, which is so common in philosophy, it has its own three-letter acronym, JTB, or Justified True Belief. If all three components are present, then we are considering a claim to knowledge, not a belief claim. I suggest that the basis on which Steve levels the accusation is founded on a misapprehension. It seems to me that Steve is conflating belief and knowledge here. The reason this might be of interest is it may indicate a category error, or at least he is not holding both concepts as distinct. A belief can either be true or false. A fact can only ever be true by definition. But given the restrictions of Twitter, you might consider that these are rather pedantic points. But I would disagree. These are not merely semantic points, but are fundamental distinctions, and we must be clear in our meaning. However, that is not actually what interested me in the tweet. What interested me was contained in the original post by HitBlunt16. The first two sentences were, "I believe that aliens exist. I am not going to make the claim that aliens exist. I believe that gods exist. I am not going to make the claims that God exists." The point I will make here is that in relation to these two sentences, Only in relation to the first could one be realistically agnostic, and that is my purpose here, to set out in detail why it would be intellectually legitimate to be agnostic in relation to aliens, but not legitimate to be agnostic in relation to the existence of gods. Steve, like many others, assumes that an individual can hold one of three views in respect to belief in gods, as indicated in this tweet by Mark Oliver Stewart. Mark, like many others, assume that each of these views is equally valid. You could be a theist, an atheist, or an agnostic. I suggest that the third option is counterfeit, or at least significantly different from the former two options. To use a phrase from the children's program Sesame Street, one of the options is not like the others. First, we will set aside some definitional issues that often obfuscate the debate. The first is in relation to the arguments surrounding the terms theism and atheism. I would suggest that whether you believe these terms to be based on the Greek root, like William Lane Craig, or whether you believe them to be the product of early scholastic French, it matters little for our purpose. You can substitute miscreant for atheist, and it would have absolutely no impact on my reasoning here. The only thing that we need to agree on is that in common usage, an atheist is someone who does not believe in gods, while a theist is one who does. This is the definition I'll be using in this video. Also, I will define belief and non-belief as distinct cognitive states. I will also use the term object to describe the condition, state, or entity of interest, so that when I use the expression to know X, X is the object of our interest. While X can be anything, in this debate, X will usually refer to God or gods. To call oneself either a theist or an atheist is to articulate one's cognitive state concerning the existence or non-existence of gods. In this scheme, to claim oneself an agnostic, strictly speaking, is to express ignorance of the existence or non-existence of the object in question. But the test must be, at least in principle, whether it can be reasoned that the object is either knowable or unknowable. To clarify my position, to call oneself either a theist or an atheist is in both cases to state the nature of one's belief. On the other hand, to call oneself an agnostic is to plead ignorance on the matter of whether or not gods exist. This, I suggest, is simply expressing common usage in long form. My reasoning would, I hope, be uncontentious at this point. If we substituted the term undecided for agnostic, then we might reveal something about the nature of agnosticism itself, because it would seem to me that agnosticism is not describing a cognitive state, but the condition of the individual's belief, rather than the object of interest. Simply put, agnosticism tells us nothing about the object in question, only that an individual has not formed a belief relating to the object of interest, for whatever reason. I'll give you an example. If a jury member cannot decide on the basis of the evidence presented whether the accused is guilty or not, that does not imply that the accused is neither guilty or innocent, merely that the jury member has been unable to decide. This indecision tells us nothing about the object, only the cognitive condition of the individual. The inability to form a belief is not in itself a belief. We now need to address the issue of certainty, which I suggest is a measure of justification. Certain knowledge about the existence of God or gods should be omitted from the respective definitions of theism and atheism, as those terms simply describe a cognitive state that relates to the belief in the existence or non-existence of a deity. I am suggesting here that belief and knowledge are distinct cognitive states, which is demonstrated by the fact that knowledge may only be of something true. I refer here to the traditional Platonic understanding of knowledge as justified true belief, which I consider good enough for government work and sufficient for this purpose. On the other hand, we know that beliefs can either be true or false from experience. So knowledge and belief are different, and that both theism and atheism are beliefs. They cannot be expressed with absolute certainty because of the nature of the object in question. By this I mean there is no empirical method one could employ, even in principle, that might decide the matter of the existence or non-existence of supernatural entities. Perhaps an example might be useful here. One can believe falsely, but not know falsely. For instance, I believe the earth is flat would be a false belief, but I know the earth is flat is not false knowledge, but rather a false belief stated as knowledge. The flat earthers' utterances are simply belief dressed as knowledge, and even if uttered with absolute certainty, amounts to little more than a belief. Such is the difference. The statement, I do not believe in God, is quite a different statement to God does not exist. The former is an expression of belief, while the latter is a claim to knowledge. But we have to be wary here, because it is quite common for a theist to state that God exists, or for an atheist to state that God does not exist, because certain forms of question restrict the response. This brings us full circle. We can now ask a simple question. Is it legitimate to be agnostic in relation to the existence of alien life? Would it be rational when asked, do you believe that aliens exist, to respond, I am agnostic in relation to alien life? The answer is yes. And why? Because the issue is decidable. Whether alien life exists is in principle knowable. This would not apply to unicorns or deities. Unicorns and deities are unknowable. You might believe that aliens exist or not exist, but still be agnostic. That is, at this moment, there is insufficient evidence that might move you from belief towards knowing. Agnosticism, if it is to be thought of as a philosophical position, is a product of consideration. But the test that needs to be applied in order for the consideration to be legitimate has to be whether the object of interest is knowable or not. There will always be doubt in relation to the proposition that alien life exists, until by whatever method it is proven. This doubt is simply an attribute of belief and permits agnosticism, at least in relation to this particular proposition. This is demonstrated by the simple statement, I think there must be alien life, but we don't know yet. That statement is, I suggest, both an expression of belief and agnostic in nature. We would consider the speaker to be reserving judgment, and it's a perfectly rational position. We come into the end of this particular adventure, but before we finish, I want to touch on a related point, and that is burden of proof. I know that Steve is fond of symbolic logic, and many of his tweets contain some rather scary equations, and I know I promise not to resort to such in this video, but I'll try and make it as painless as possible. When we consider A and not A, the common term is A. Simply put, if we not something, we need something to not. If we have proposition P, then not P is the negation of P. The claim that gods exist is the proposition being considered, and atheism is the claim that gods do not exist. The common term is God or gods, without which atheism is rendered meaningless. The burden of proof always rests with those making the claim, and it should be obvious to most that the burden must fall on the theist because it is he or she that has introduced the proposition. The atheist is refuting that proposition. Being an agnostic does not preclude one from also being an atheist or a theist. I believe in God, but I cannot know, is a perfectly rational position in my opinion. In other words, there would be nothing amiss about prefixing agnostic with atheist or theist. It seems to me as unnecessary and perhaps clumsy, because if one's reasoning admits doubt, then it is agnostic in nature anyway. Agnosticism in this scheme is not another belief system, but merely a method or attitude by which one is an atheist or theist. An attitude is something a person has in addition to his or her beliefs, not instead of them. So when a query is answered with a proclamation of agnosticism, the question, like it or not, still stands. Adventure at this point. I hope you found something of interest in this video. If you would like to support my channel, I now have a Subscribestar page. If you're unable to support my work through Subscribestar, you can share, like or comment. It's all good. Thank you for watching.